Welcome to a new MTG Jank EDH deck tech series. Oh yeah. Today we're going to share fun original deck lists tested on MTGO in casual rooms. Today we have our EDH deck tech series number 3, Breeches and Toggo, Pirates Plunder Your Opponent's Cards. So we're going to focus on these two partner commanders in red, Breeches the Brazen Plunderer and Toggo the Goblin Weaponsmith. So here's the full price MTGO list, and this is what the deck has been tested with and what this deck list is being shown today. So we have Breeches the Brazen Plunderer and Toggo the Goblin Weaponsmith here. And you can see this deck is 16 tickets in on MTGO, and that's because it runs a copy of Mana Crypt. So in the budget version, if you cut out Mana Crypt, it will be under 4 tickets. We also, so here's the budget version. It's 3 tickets. And the main change is the Mana Crypt. And the paper list, this is a budget paper list that is also in the description of this video. If you want to check it out, I had to make a lot of changes, but it came out to around $33, so it'll be very affordable if you want to play it in paper as well. But keep in mind that there will be a lot of changes to that decklist version, so certain strategies will be a little different. So let's talk about our commanders today. So our first one is Breeches the Brazen Plunderer. It's a 4-mana 3/3 legendary goblin pirate. Arg. It has menace, and whenever one or more pirates you control deal damage to your opponents, exile the top card of each of those opponents' libraries. You may play those cards this turn, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So this commander turns all of your pirates into card draw. Luckily, this card also has menace, so it can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. So it will be easy to get some card advantage off of Breeches, around turns 5 or 6, or earlier if you can ramp into Breeches on time. Our other commander is Toggo, the Goblin Weaponsmith. It's a 3-mana 2/2 legendary Goblin Artificer, and it has a landfall ability that whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you can create a colorless equipment artifact token named Rock. With equipped creature has 1 in tap, sacrifice Rock. This creature deals 2 damage to any target and equip 1. So keep in mind, both of these cards have the mechanic partner that you can have 2 commanders if both have partner. So this deck we're running Toggo and Breeches. Both of them have partner, and this is a mono red goblin pirate artifact partner deck. So here's the Rock. The Rock, you have to equip it for 1, so you will attach it to a creature, and then you can pay 1 and tap the creature to sacrifice Rock to deal 2 damage to any target. So the combo with these 2 commanders is that when you have Breeches in play, its ability to play your opponent's cards, you have to deal damage. So it doesn't have to be combat damage. So although when you first look at Breeches, you're thinking about, I have to attack with Breeches to be able to cast my opponent's cards. Well, not anymore. If you're running Toggo and you are playing lands, then you can get the Rock, and you can equip Rock to any of your pirates, whether it's Breeches or, Toggo's not a pirate, but any of your other pirates that will be running in this deck. So basically, you can pay 1 and you can deal 2 damage to an opponent, and then you can play the top card of their library. And you can notice that it says cards, so this includes land cards. It doesn't just have to be non-land cards. So you can also play lands from this ability to create a new Rock. So what are we doing in our deck? We're going to have some ping. So similar to the Rock, we're going to have cards or effects that can deal damage to players so we can activate Breeches. We're also playing our opponent's card, so that's from Breeches, very, very heavily focused on having Breeches in play. And landfall for Toggo or Toggo, not sure the pronunciation, but the ability to play lands in our deck to ramp will allow us to get more Rocks, so we can ping more things and we can play more of our opponent's cards. We're also running Pirate Tribal so that many of our creatures can draw us additional cards from Breeches' ability. And we also have a few janky artifact combos because rocks are artifacts, they are equipment. So a lot of our mana rocks as well are artifacts. So we'll run a few janky things here and there for fun. So let's talk about ping. Ping is when you deal direct damage to players or creatures. So our main example is our commander, Toggo, the Goblin Weaponsmith. And rock deals 2 damage to any target. So we can deal damage to planeswalkers, creatures, players, you name it. If we want to ping someone, we will. So here's the great rock. So hopefully, if your deck is playing according to plan, you will be producing many rocks in your game. So why ping? Well, it activates Breeches' ability to cast our opponent's cards. So with Breeches, we can activate rock, and now we exile the top card of that opponent's library, and we can cast that card with any mana. So even though we're a red deck, we'll be able to cast the cards that we get off of Breeches' ability. So let's look at some ping. So yeah, we can put on any pirate. So it doesn't have to be Breeches. We can put a rock on our Wily Goblin, for example, and now our Wily Goblin can allow us to play the opponent's card. So we also have some ping enchantments and equipment. So we're running Fire Whip. This is a 2-mana aura, and it gives the enchanted creature the ability to tap to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. You can also sacrifice Fire Whip, and Fire Whip deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So you'll notice that, as long as the creature deals damage, we'll get the trigger from Breeches. So the Fire Whip gives the creature the ability to deal 1 damage. So when it deals the damage, the Breeches trigger will go on the stack, and we can cast that card until end of turn. We also have Viridian Longbow, which is an equipment with 3, and it has equipped creature. This creature deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So we can also target creatures with Fire Whip and Viridian Longbow, but the main purpose is to target the player, so kind of giving our creature a pseudo-unblockable way to draw us cards. And we also run Sorcerer's Wand, which is a 1-mana equipment, and with equipped 3. And the creature can deal 1 damage to target player or planeswalker, and 2 if it's a wizard. So this one, though Sorcerer's Wand cannot target creatures, but that's okay. The purpose is we really want these effects so that we can ping our opponent so we can play their cards. And this also allows us to play the cards on the main phase, on our first main phase, not on the second. So certain cards or mechanics might work better before our attack step as well. So we can also turn our rocks into ping damage. We can do this using Gurapur Aether Grid. So this doesn't activate our Breeches for our card advantage, but it allows our rocks to turn into damage, which is really useful because now every 2 lands we can tap our 2 rocks, and we can deal damage to creature or player. So we can kill little creatures with low toughness, or we can also deal damage to players. So we also have our ping creatures. So ideally, we want Breeches in play so we can get that effect to exile the top card and then be able to cast it until end of turn. So we're running Lightning Rig Crew. This one is a Goblin Pirate, so it's a pirate. And you can tap it to deal 1 damage to each opponent. And whenever you cast a pirate spell, you can untap it. So this card is great because if we tap it, it should trigger Breeches 3 times because we deal 1 damage to each opponent. So with Lightning Rig Crew and Breeches in play, we'll be able to cast any of the top cards from any of our opponent's library. And if we play another pirate, then we can untap it and do it again. So we can play lands, etc. So Fathom Fleet Swordjack is our next pirate. It's an orc pirate, 4 mana, 4/3. And whenever it attacks, it deals damage to the player or planeswalker it's attacking, equal to the number of artifacts you control. So in our deck, we could have a lot of artifacts because of all of our rocks are artifacts. So that's already good. This is already a playable card. But it also triggers Breeches. So it'll get Breeches trigger when the artifact damage occurs and also when the comet damage occurs. It also has Encore. So if we're able to Encore, then we'll get 3 cards from Breeches for each opponent. So you'll get 1 card for each opponent, and then if any of them actually end up dealing combat damage, you'll get a 2nd card. We are also running Fanatical Firebrand, a 1 mana 1/1 haste, and it has tap and sacrifice, deal 1 damage to target creature or player. So if we really need to, we can play this and we can sack it and we can exile target opponent's top card and cast until end of turn. But all of these cards, kind of allow us to deal direct damage to get the Breeches trigger without the combat damage. So why landfall? Well, Toggo Goblin Weaponsmith triggers whenever we play a land, so we can get a rock. So landfall lands. These are lands that can activate landfall. So we're running Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, and Warped Landscape. Now, Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse both sacrifice themselves to search our library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then we shuffle our library. So in our deck, we are mono red, so the only basic land that we are running is a mountain. So the purpose of these is just to trigger landfall, because you play it, you sacrifice it, and now you have two landfall, you have the Terramorphic Expanse entering play and the basic. So if we have Toggo out, then that means we're going to get a rock for when we cast the Evolving Wilds, and we'll also get a rock when the basic land comes into play. So that's the idea of all these landfall lands and cards in our deck, is that they're going to net us not just one rock, but two if Toggo is in play. So Warped Landscape is similar to Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic, except it can tap to add one colorless mana. But you have to pay 2 and sacrifice it if you want to get the basic land. So the downside is you have to pay mana, 2 mana if you want to search. But the upside is that you can play it and tap for mana. It's not like a tap land. So it has that immediacy that some of the other ones don't have. We're also running Mountain Valley and Rocky Tar Pit. Now both of these in our deck only, search for a mountain, but they come into play tapped and you can sacrifice them to search for mountain or forest or swamp or mountain and put it onto the battlefield. So those lands come into play untapped. So this is kind of a reverse Evolving Wilds. Evolving Wilds puts a land into play tapped but comes into play untapped, whereas Mountain Valley and Rocky Tar Pit come into play tapped but put the land into play untapped. And you'll notice that these don't have to be basics. So if you somehow are able to find some really great mountain card that works in a mono red deck, and then these would become more powerful. Now we're also running 3 panoramas. All of these tap for a colorless mana, and they're similar to the Warped Landscape, where you can pay mana and sacrifice it, search for a basic land card. And in our deck, we're running only mountains. So all 3 of these can search for a mountain card and put it onto the battlefield. And so they're all like Evolving Wilds, except you have to pay the activated cost of 1, but they also tap for mana, so they're not tap lands per se. We're also running Guildless Commons and Thawing Glaciers. Guildless Commons is a Karoo land, so when it comes into play, you have to return a land you control to your hand, and it taps for 2 mana. Thawing Glaciers is a very interesting card. I think it's from Alliances originally, but it's had a reprint on MTGO, so in a Masters set. And when it enters the battlefield tapped, you can pay 1 and tap it, and you can do the Evolving Wilds effect of search your library for a basic land card, in our case a mountain, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. Now after you search, you return Thawing Glacier to your hand at the beginning of the next cleanup step. So at the end of your turn, Thawing Glaciers goes back to your hand, and now next turn you can play it again, and the following turn you can search. So it's a very slow, repeatable Evolving Wild. So in my experience playing with the card, it's not that efficient, but in a landfall deck, it can have a lot of value if you're not drawing other lands, because at least you can play the same land every turn. And if we have effects that allow us to play additional lands, then we can run out of lands pretty easily, and Guildless Commons and Thawing Glaciers allows us to play additional lands with the same lands we have. Now we also have some landfall creatures. So we have, these are creatures that can activate landfall by putting lands into play. So Walking Atlas can tap and put a land card from our hand onto the battlefield. So this card is somewhat efficient. It's good because it's going to ramp us. Turn 2, we play it. Turn 3, we can tap it. We'll have 4 mana if we have the additional land card in our hand, so we can play Breeches, turn 3 if we get Walking Atlas turn 2. But the downside is that it doesn't give us card advantage per se, it just increases our tempo. So we're wasting a card to have this 1/1 to allow us to put lands into play from our hand. But once we're out of lands in our hand, and then, it's not really helping us so much. Alpine Guide is like pseudo ramp. It's a 3-mana 3/3. And when it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for a mountain and then put it onto the battlefield tap. So similar to some of our other lands, this could be any mountain, but I think we're only running basics. But so 3-mana 3-drop, and it searches for a mountain, and you put it into play tapped. Great, right? We ramp for 1. The downsides, it has to attack each turn of Able. And when it dies, when it leaves the battlefield, you have to sacrifice a mountain. So it's temporary ramp because we get that landfall trigger, but later we have to sacrifice it. So Burner's Chart, you can pay 3 mana for a 2/2 elk, and it has 3 and sacrifice, and you can search your library for 2 basic lands and put them onto the battlefield tapped. So this is great, but the downside is that you're paying 6 mana total. So 6 mana for 2 lands, that's typically 4 mana in green. But this is red, and we don't have a lot of cards that can activate landfall. So this is one of our best options for what we want to do, unfortunately. Let's look at some of our landfall artifacts. So these are artifacts that can activate landfall. We are running Gurapur Orrery. It's a 4-mana artifact from Aether Revolt, and each player may play an additional land on each of his or her turns. So this is a symmetrical effect. It's not just for your board, but in our deck, we care about our lands because of Toggo. So I think, we want to be able to play as many as we can. And also in our deck, we can run out of steam. We can actually play our hand pretty frequently. And it has another ability on it that at the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, that player draws 3 cards. So this could also be useful in the unlikely case where we can really empty our hand. We're also running Thematic Compass, a 2-mana artifact. It has 3 and tap and search for a basic land card. Reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. And at your end step, we can transform it into a land, which we'll talk about later. We're also running Wayfarer's Bauble, 1-mana artifact. 2 and tap for a rampant growth. You search your deck for a basic land card, put it into battlefield tap, then sacrifice then shuffle your library. Explorer's Scope is a 1-mana equipment. Whenever equipped creature attacks, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may put it onto the battlefield tapped, and it has equip 1. So Explorer's Scope, I think, is a little underrated, underplayed, but it's great if you have some creatures and you're attacking. And in our deck, we want to attack with our pirates, so we will basically always be attacking. And if we can get a trigger off of this, then that means we can get a rock. So it is possible for us to get rocks every time that we're attacking, and lands and ramp. It's not always likely, but I really like this card. I think it's undervalued, and in red, we don't have traditional rampant growth like effects, so this is kind of as close as we can get. Now, this is a kind of ramp card as well in our deck, Amulet Vigor. It's a 1-mana artifact, and whenever a permanent enters the battlefield tapped and under your control, untap it. So now, when we play our permanents that come into play tapped, like Thawing Glaciers or Nyx Lotus, which is a ramp card in our deck, they come into play untapped. So Amulet Vigor is kind of like a ritual in this way because it saves us that tempo. It's a huge tempo swing. So now instead of waiting an extra turn to tap our Thawing Glaciers, now we can play it and search immediately. So it's very effective. And with Nyx Lotus, now this enters the battlefield tapped, and you can choose a color and an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. So in our deck, red. So for each red mana symbol that we have on the battlefield, now we can pay for, play Nyx Lotus, and tap it. And if we have more than 4, then we just generated value with it. And we didn't have to wait a turn, because the main drawback of this card is that it enters the battlefield tapped. So Amulet Vigor really powers up a lot of our kind of like janky mana sources in our deck, or things that are just a bit too slow. So this is a card that it is a little bit expensive. So if you're running on a budget, you will probably cut it in paper. But if you can keep it in the deck, then I would highly recommend it. So why pirates? Any pirate can trigger Breeches ability, that whenever one or more pirates we control deal damage to our opponents, exile the top card of each of our opponent's libraries. Of those opponent's libraries, you may play those cards this turn, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So we really want to get those cards with Breeches. That's kind of why this deck is so much fun, because we can play our opponent's cards, and that's why we want so much ramp in our deck as well. So we get that card draw. So ping creatures, we talked about these earlier. All these cards are really great with Breeches. They all give us immediate card value. All of them are very, very easy for us to use with Breeches. We don't need a ping equipment or a ping enchantment. All of these directly are just perfect. Exactly what our deck wants to do. Now, we're also just running pirates. So, we are in mono red. We don't have access to blue or black. So our pirate options are a bit limited. But either way, any pirate in our deck is going to be strong as long as we have Breeches in play. And with Toggo and our rocks, all of these are going to allow us to draw cards. So even our Ricking Runner, which worst case scenario is a 1 mana 1/1 for a strike, it does have raid, so it could be a 1 mana 2/2 for a strike, which is, great value. But in EDH, a 2/2 for a strike does not get you very far. But in our deck, these type of cards can give us card draw. So they're very powerful in our deck, as long as we have Breeches in play. Otherwise, we're kind of very underpowered. We also have Daring Buccaneer, 1 mana 2/2, but it costs an additional 2 mana unless we reveal a pirate card when we play it. We're also running Dargo. Now, Dargo's, has its own little strat. We can sacrifice rocks, so we can reduce the casting cost. So this is a 7 mana 7/5 trample, but if we can sacrifice 3 rocks, now it's a 1 red mana for a 7/5 trample. So that is a great deal. It just depends on how much we value our rocks and what our mana situation is. And we're running 15 pirates total. So we're also running Dire Fleet Daredevil. This is a 2 mana 2/1 first strike. When it enters the battlefield, we kind of get a Breeches trigger. Kind of, in a way. It's a little different, but we can exile target instant or sorcery card from an opponent's graveyard, and we can cast it this turn. We can spend mana of any color, and after we cast it, it gets exiled. So instead of exiling the top card of an opponent's library, which we can still do with Breeches, this one has a ETB effect. We play it, we immediately can cast some removal spell or card draw or some ramp from our opponent. So Dire Fleet Daredevil could even be considered one of our ramp options if we need it as well. Coercive Recruiter is a 5 mana 4/3 orc pirate, and whenever Coercive Recruiter or another pirate enters the battlefield under your control, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature until end of turn, it gains haste and becomes a pirate in addition to its other type. So, when you play this card or any of our other pirates, we get to threaten a creature. So we can take control of it and attack. And you'll notice the sneaky part at the end of this is that it becomes a pirate. So that creature that we take control of can also activate Breeches. So this card is really fun. It's also a big combo card in EDH, but we are not running it in that sense. We're running it very fairly with Breeches. So we also have some Menace pirates. So Menace, this creature can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. So we have Goblin Trailblazer, which is a 2 mana 2/1. We also have Kari Zev, the Skyship Raider, a legendary human pirate with a monkey. And it's a 2 mana 1/3 first strike menace. And when it attacks, it creates a monkey that's also attacking and that gets exiled at the end of combat. So these are some treasure pirates. So we're running Wily Goblin, which is a 1/1 that creates a treasure for 2 mana. Captain Lannery Storm, which is a 2/2 for 3 with haste. And whenever it attacks, we can create a treasure. And we can also sacrifice a treasure to give Captain Lannery Storm +1/+0. And we're also running Impulsive Pilferer, which is a card from Commander Legends. It's a 1 mana 1/1, and when it dies, you create a treasure. It has Encore, so you can exile it from the graveyard, and for each opponent, you create a token copy that attacks that opponent this turn if able. They gain haste, and you sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step, and you can only activate as a sorcery. So for 4 mana, we can kind of gain 3 treasures if you're versing 3 opponents for your following turn. So this can be a fun kind of ramp option. And also, if any of those 1/1s deal damage to a player, if you have Breeches out, you get the Breeches triggers. So speaking of Encore, we're also running Coastline Marauders and Fathom Fleet Swordjack. Now we talked about Impulsive Pilfer and Fathom Fleet Swordjack previously, but Coastline Marauders is a 3 mana 0/3, has Trample. Whenever it attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each land defending player controls. So when you Encore this, it'll attack all of your opponents, and the Coastline Marauders power will be equal to the number of lands the player that it's attacking controls. So if one player has 3 lands, it would be a 3/3. If another one has 8, it would be an 8/3. And if the other one has 5, it would be a 5/3. So yeah, all of these cards, really fun and just, powerful in terms of the pirates we have available. Ramp. So these are cards that add mana value through lands, mana rocks, or cost reduction. So here are some of our mana rocks. Now, Mana Crypt is 0 mana. It's an artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, flip a coin. If you lose a flip, Mana Crypt deals 3 damage to you. Now you can tap and add 2 colorless. So this is a soul ring for 0 mana with the downside of dealing 3 damage to you 50% of the time. So this is a really powerful card, and if you're on a budget, just cut it out of the deck. It's not necessary. I just had it in my collection, so when I built the deck, I threw it in because I think this deck is kind of fun and janky. So having some fast mana did not really break the deck to me, in my opinion. Next, we're also running Basalt Monolith. It's a 3 mana artifact. It doesn't untap during your untap step, and you can tap it to add 3 mana, and you can also pay 3 to untap it. So this is a card that can help ramp us too. We're also running Worn Power Stone, which is a 3 mana artifact that comes into play tapped, and it can tap for 2 mana. So just all of these are very, Mana Crypt and Worn Power Stone are both very efficient. Basalt Monolith has some issues, but our deck is running a few ways to counteract or fix those, the problem that it doesn't untap. So we are also running Fire Diamond, which is a 2 mana artifact that comes into play tapped, and you can tap it to add a red. Nyx Lotus, which we mentioned earlier, comes into play tapped and adds for your devotion to red, because we're going to choose red in our deck. Unless maybe we have a bunch of opponents things that are color that we want to do. We're also running Gilded Lotus, which is 5 mana for an artifact that can tap for 3 mana of any one color. So this can also help, cast any activated abilities or things of permanents that our opponents own, but that we control. So Strange Mana. Clock of Omens. So Clock of Omens is a fun card from 5th Dawn, and we can tap 2 untapped artifacts you control to untap target artifact. So now our rocks can be used to untap our mana rocks. So every 2 rocks can untap a mana rock. So now our rocks can provide mana. So now you could tap 2 rocks to untap your Nyx Lotus. So that can be a lot of mana. We're also running Krark Clan Ironworks. Now you might know this card from Egg's decks, and in those decks it's very broken. So this is a very expensive card in paper. It's like $30. But in our deck, why we are really running it is just so we can sacrifice our rocks. So if we want to ramp, let's say we get an expensive spell of our opponents, we can sacrifice our rocks. So now each land that we play can potentially add us an extra 2 mana from our rocks. So turning our rocks into a ritual effect is very, very strong and fun, and it's very bursty. You just can use your rocks in different ways. Our final one is Inspiring Statuary. Is a 3 mana artifact, and it gives our non-artifact spells improvise. So what is improvise? Your artifacts can help cast those spells. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating mana abilities pays for 1. So now, Inspiring Statuary turns our rocks into mana rocks. Badum. Yeah, I went there. So this is a very flavorful card in our deck, and turning all of our rocks into mana rocks is great. Just super good value for 3 mana. So, what can we do with all this mana? Well, one thing we can do is recast our commanders. So our commanders cost 3 and 4. So when I've played this deck, sometimes you have to cast Breeches for 8 mana. And having those rocks with a card like Inspiring Statuary or Krark Clan Ironworks allows you to cast your commanders for 8 or 10 in the late game when you need to. So they're very effective at allowing us to recast our commanders and the cards that we get off of Breeches. So let's talk about our next section, flip lands. These are cards that flip into lands. So our first one is Dowsing Dagger. It's a 2-mana artifact equipment. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent creates 2 0/2 green plant creature tokens with Defender. Equipped creature gets +2/+1, and whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you may transform Dowsing Dagger, and it has equip 2. So you cast it for 2, equip a creature for 2, probably Breeches because it has Menace, hit the player, and then you transform it. So the transform card is Lost Veil, and it can tap to add 3 mana of any one color to your mana pool. So Dowsing Dagger is always like been a fun ramp card. In our deck, you know, we're not going to get the landfall trigger because Dowsing Dagger was already in play, but the ability to just dump a land that can tap for 3 after combat is great ramp, and especially mono red where our options are really lacking. We're also running Thematic Compass, 2-mana artifact, 3 tap, search your library for basic land, put it into play, reveal it, shuffle your library, and at your end step, if we have 7 or more lands, we can transform it. So Thematic Compass transforms into Spires of Araska. It can tap to add colorless, or it can tap to untap target attacking creature an opponent controls and remove it from combat. So this is like a Maze of Ith that is on a card that can help search us for lands. So it can help us defend, but it also helps us get that value of always hitting our land drops and being able to thin out our deck as well. So another fun, powerful flip land. Our next one is Treasure Map. It's a 2-mana artifact, and you can pay 1 and tap. And when you do, you scry 1. You put a landmark counter on Treasure Map. Then, if there are 3 or more landmark counters on it, remove those counters. Transform Treasure Map and create 3 colorless treasure artifact tokens with tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So when you flip it, it turns into Treasure Cove. This is a land that can tap to add 1 colorless, and it can also tap to sacrifice a treasure, draw a card. In our deck, we are running a few other treasure cards, so outside of the treasures that Treasure Map creates, it also has additional card draw value as well. And all of these flip lands, you know, we paid 2 mana for Treasure Map, and when it flips, it becomes a land that can tap for mana. So in a way, it's like a giant, it's like a rampant growth because it gives us that mana. It just takes a long time to get it. And Treasure Map also gives us a bunch of treasures, and it can also tap to sacrifice treasures to draw cards. So it's card draw, it's ramp, it's scry, it's lots of things. It's slow, but if you're able to flip it, you get tons of value out of it. And in red, you know, this is you'll be happy playing this card. Double mana. So these are cards that double mana produced. Wow, doubling our mana. Let's get tons of mana. So we have Cage Sun. Cage Sun is 6 mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a color. Creatures you control of the chosen color get +1/+1. Whenever a land's ability adds 1 or more mana of the chosen color to your mana pool, add 1 additional mana of that color to your mana pool. So now when we tap a mountain or any of our lands that can produce red, because in our deck we'll choose red, it's going to produce that amount of mana +1. So our mountains will add 2 red mana. So this can double our mana produced from our lands. Gauntlet of Power is the same thing, except it's not for you control. So this is creatures of the chosen color get +1/+1. So all red creatures will get +1/+1. And also all basic lands. So in this case, it'll be mountains, right? So when basic lands tap for mana of the chosen color, its controller adds 1 additional mana of that color. So now whenever our opponent taps a mountain for a red mana, they'll also get the additional effect. Gauntlet of Might is a 4 mana artifact. So we've had 6, 5, and now 4. And red creatures get +1/+1. Whenever a mountain is tapped for mana, its controller adds red to his or her mana pool. So Gauntlet of Might is basically a 4 mana version of Gauntlet of Power. Because in our deck, we always want to choose a red. And Gauntlet of Might just says mountains. Gauntlet of Power says basic land. So if some weird situation, swamps can tap for red, those swamps will add the 2 red. Very, very niche scenario though. So very uncommon. Probably not going to happen. So rituals, these are spells that add mana just for that phase. Now we have Mana Geyser, 5 mana sorcery, add red for each tapped land your opponents control. So this thing is nuts. You know, typically you have 2 or 3 opponents in EDH. Now if they're all tapped out, it's your turn. You can use this, and now you have like 10 red mana. So this card is always very satisfying to me. You always kind of have it hiding in your hand until that great opportunity where you just use it and ramp like 4 or 5 mana. It's really great. We also have Ironcrag Feet, 1 and 3 red for sorcery. Add 7 red mana. You can cast only 1 more spell this turn. So this does not allow us to cast both of our commanders, but you know, you might have some spell that you really want to cast from your opponent's deck or something, and this can help, you know, be able to cast it. Geosurge is 4 red mana, add 7 red, and now you can only spend this mana to cast artifact or creature spells. So Geosurge I really like in this deck because Toggo costs 3 and Breeches costs 4. So, you know, turn 3 or 4, if you have Geosurge in your opening hand, you can cast it and you can play both of your commanders. So it's just very, very effective at ramping in this deck. I've been very happy with Geosurge. Seething Song is 3 mana, instant. Add 5 red to your mana pool. So this nets you 2 additional red. So it's not as good as Geosurge because Geosurge gives you 3, but Seething Song you can use for anything. You don't have to use it on your creatures and artifacts, even though that is the main components of our decks. But all these cards, they're here so that we can ramp and play our cards faster because, you know, a lot of our card advantage is from Breeches. So we don't need to play our own cards. We just need to dump our stuff so we can start playing our opponents. Now we're also running Battle Hymn. There's a 2 mana instant, and we add red for each creature that you control. And we also have Brightstone Ritual, 1 red, add red to your mana pool for each goblin in play. So it's not just you control, it's in play. So maybe your opponents have a goblin, but probably not. But both of our commanders are goblins. So if we have both of our commanders out and we play Brightstone Ritual, it will net us, we will gain at least 1 additional red mana. So in most cases, this will always produce the extra red because of our own goblins. And we do have some other goblins in our deck that happen to be pirates as well. So we could have produced more than 1, but in most cases, it will probably just produce 1. Now, our board wipe in the deck is Blasphemous Act. This is 9 mana. Costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. And it deals 13 damage to each creature. So this is just a very good red staple board wipe. Now for card draw, you know, we have Breeches, which is our main game plan, but sometimes, you know, Breeches can get offline. So we're running some other ways that also can help us draw cards. We have Reforge the Soul, 5 mana sorcery. Each player discards his or her hand and draws 7 cards. It also has Miracle for 2, and we can cast this card for its miracle cost when you draw it, if it's the first card you drew this turn. So this card is great in our deck for many reasons. One, we're running lots of rituals and lots of mana rocks, basically things that we just get out of our hand, and then we can play Reforge the Soul and refill our hand. And also our opponents, they probably have more cards than us in their hand, so they're not going to get as much card advantage out of it than we will. And Sandstone Oracle kind of goes in the same vein. The idea that we will have less cards in our hand than our opponents will. So this is a 7 mana 4/4 flying, and when it enters the battlefield, we choose an opponent. If that player has more cards in hand than you, draw cards equal to the difference. So if you play Sandstone Oracle and you have 1 card left in your hand and your opponent has 6, when that ETB effect happens on the stack, we would draw the 5 cards because 1 and 6, the difference is 5. So it might be 7 mana, but you would be surprised at the amount of card advantage that you can get from a card from Sandstone Oracle. I think this card might not look great like on the surface, but when you actually play with it, there are many circumstances that you're very happy with the card. Explosion of Riches is 6 mana sorcery. Draw a card. Then each other player may draw a card. Whenever a card is drawn this way, Explosion of Riches deals 5 damage to target opponent chosen at random from among your opponents. So, worst case scenario, Explosion of Riches is 6 mana, draw a card, Lava Axe a random opponent. Deal 5 damage to target opponent. But the upside of this, like the best situation, let's say you're in a 4-player match, you have 3 opponents. If each opponent draws a card, now you're going to deal 5 damage 4 times randomly between your 3 opponents. So that is 20 damage total for 6 mana. So this card is super fun. It's kind of one of my current pet cards. I'm just throwing in all my red decks. And you're not playing it for the card draw. You're playing it just for 6 mana, deal a ton of damage to all your opponents. So if you have a lower life total than your opponents, this card is a great way to kind of balance it out. But if everyone has the same life total, what's going to happen is that you're going to be like 10 life ahead of most players, or 5 to 10 life ahead. So they will start attacking you first, even if your board is not nearly as threatening or powerful. But overall, I really love the card. It's also really flavorful. I love that art, the exploding treasure box like on the goblin. So, you've got how much gold there? Exactly. Really fun card. I love this design. We also have a few card draw equipments. We have Mask of Memory. This is a 2 mana artifact equipment. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you may draw 2 cards. If you do, discard a card, equip 1. We also have Infiltration Lens. This is a 1 mana artifact equipment. Whenever equipped creature becomes blocked by a creature, you may draw 2 cards, equip 1. So Infiltration Lens is especially great in our deck with our menace creatures. Now, if they don't block our creatures, we get the Breeches trigger. And if they do block the creature, and then we will draw 4 cards because they will drop with 2 creatures. So not only will we get 2, but we'll draw 4. So Infiltration Lens de-incentivizes our opponents to block whatever creature it's on. And at the worst case scenario, if Breeches is in play, we'll at least get to exile their top card and be able to cast it if we can afford the mana. Now we also have Treasure Map and Garapur Orrery. Both of these we discussed earlier, but both of them have card draw. Treasure Map, when it flips, can sacrifice treasures to draw a card. Garapur Orrery can draw 3 cards if you're hellbent, if you have no cards in hand at your upkeep. And we talked about Breeches, our main game plan, exiling the top card of our opponent's library, being able to cast it. In Dire Fleet, we can exile Inside Sorcery and cast that. So some additional card draw as well. So Death Touch, this is another little sub-theme in our deck. Creatures dealt damage by this creature are destroyed. So if we put, all these artifacts can give our creatures Death Touch. So we have Quietus Spike, 3 mana equipment. Equipped creature is Death Touch. When it deals damage to a player, that player loses half of his or her life rounded up. So this can deal a lot of damage. If someone gains infinite life, this can take half of that infinite life away. So that can be pretty funny. Gorgon Flail, 2 mana equipment, equip 2. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, it has Death Touch. And Basilisk Collar, 1 mana. Equipped creature has Death Touch and Lifelink, equip 2. So Ping of Death. Right? If we have a rock and we sacrifice the rock, the creature deals 2 damage to any target. Same with our other ping cards, like Viridian Longbow. If we tap the creature deals 1 damage to the creature or player. So we talked about earlier how our goal with these types of effects is to deal damage to the player so we can get the Breeches trigger. But now, when we add in equipment like Gorgon Flail that gives the creature Death Touch, now we have the option of just pinging a creature to death. We can just target any creature as long as it doesn't have Hexproof or Shroud. And if it's not indestructible, then it should die to Death Touch from that damage. We're also running some protection. These are cards that can protect our commander or commanders. And these are really important because I think it's okay if Toggo dies, but Breeches is really our core of the deck. And if Breeches dies, now we lose all of our card advantage. And we can always recast Breeches, but having him out and stay out will gain so much tempo for us. So we have a few cards that can help sustain that effect on the battlefield for us. So we have Hammer of Nizan. This is a 4 mana equipment. And when Hammer of Nizan or another equipment enters the battlefield, like any of our rocks, we can attach that equipment to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has indestructible. So in our deck, Hammer of Nizan is great because it helps protect our Breeches and it can save us a mana for every rock that we want to equip. Because now when we play a land, it creates the rock and the rock can equip to a creature. Swiftfoot Boots gives a creature Hexproof and Haste, and Lightning Greaves gives a creature Haste and Shroud. So with Swift Boot, we can still target our own creature, but with Lightning Greaves, we can't target the creature. So if we want to add a rock, we have to move the Greaves to equip the rock, and then we can move the Greaves back. So just keep that in mind. So the MVP of this deck is Lightning Rig Crew. Now the reason why I think Lightning Rig Crew is the MVP is because whenever we tap it, we get 3 triggers of Breeches, and if we play another pirate, like a 1-drop pirate, then we get 3 more when we do it. So this combo allows us to have access to a lot of our opponent's cards, and that's kind of what the purpose of this deck is in a nutshell. So because this card is so effective at what we want to do, I'm even added a copy of Goblin Matron. So this allows us to search for Goblin card, and our Lightning Rig Crew is a Goblin. So now when we play Goblin Matron, we can search for Lightning Rig Crew and then play Lightning Rig Crew. And then if we have Lightning Greaves, we can do it immediately and get all that value. Otherwise, we have to wait a turn. But it's just another copy of Lightning Rig Crew because we're able to tutor it. So really, really like this card. This is like, ideally, if you're looking to mulligan, this is what you want to keep in your opening hand. So, budget cuts. So we're going to talk about the budget of the deck. Is it affordable? Paper or online? Do you want to play the deck in paper or online on an MTGO? So this deck list was made on MTGO. A lot of it was from my spare cards, but I had bought the 2 commanders and wanted to build around it, and this deck is the result. So the full price of this current list is 16 tickets or $1,800. And the easiest cuts to save cash, Mana Crypt, this is like a $160 card on paper or 10 ticks online, and you can replace it with Everflowing Chalice, which is like $1 or less in paper, and super dirt cheap on MTGO. Hammer Nizan is pretty expensive. I think it's like $10 in paper or something, and it's like almost 2 ticks on MTGO, and you can replace it with Mirror Shield, which isn't great, but it gives the creature hexproof, and that's, Hammer gives it indestructible, so, it's just protection equipment. Gauntlet of Might is the most expensive card in our deck in paper. It's like $1,500. And you could throw in Ketis, Emberclaw Familiar. Now, Ketis is a 2-mana 1/1 legendary elemental lizard, and whenever a commander you control deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each opponent. So now, when Breeches hits an opponent for combat damage, it hits all of our opponents, and we get the Breeches trigger for each one. So this could also be a fun partner commander. If you don't like Toggo and Rocks, you could play Ketis as well if you want to keep your deck but switch up the commanders as well. So these are the expensive cards in MTGO. We have Mana Crypt, Gauntlet of Might, and Hammer of Nizan, which are the 3 we just talked about. So our budget MTGO list comes down to only 3 tickets. And the most expensive cards in the list is that 3-mana Mana Rock that like taps and adds for 2. And I forget the other card, but basically there's no card over a ticket in this list. So everything is very affordable, and the cards that, if you don't want to pay 50 cents for an artifact, you can replace that Mana Rock with another one. So these are the expensive cards in paper. These are all $10 plus. So in the paper budget version, I ended up cutting pretty much all cards like are around $2 and up. So I was pretty budget restricted in my paper budget version. But if you want to, you could just cut the Gauntlet of Might and Mana Crypt, and the deck, it'll be like $150 or something. But I cut it down to $30 because I really like budget decks. But these were the expensive cards in paper. We have Reforged of Soul at 11, Mana Crypt 156, Amulet of Vigor 20, Gauntlet of Might 1400, almost 1500, Hammer of Nizan $10, Krark Clan Ironworks $31, Gauntlet of Power $12, and Thawing Glaciers at $50. So here's the budget paper list. I got it down to $33. So if you are looking for a budget fun deck, you like to play your opponent's cards, then Breeches and Toggo could be it for you. You're still going to be able to do these synergies. Just the power level of the deck goes down dramatically because all the artifacts that did our mana doubling and the flip lands, I had to cut all those because those were all like $5 plus. So unless you have some of that stuff lying around, you're going to be able to do the same themes and synergies, but the deck is not going to be as smooth. And I'll just run through some of those cuts very quickly. So I won't describe these cards. We cut Thawing Glaciers for Goblin Burrows. So this is for the paper version. Blasphemous Act for Fury Cannonade. And there's many budget alternatives. This is just what I put in for my $33 deck. Direfleet Daredevil for Headstrong Brute. Walking Atlas for Captivating Crew. Wayfarer's Bauble for Armillary Sphere. Captain Lannery Storm for Stormfleet Swashbuckler. Brightstone Ritual for Vessel of Volatility. Reforge the Soul for Magus of the Wheel. Amulet of Vigor for Experimental Frenzy. Basilisk Collar for Blight Sickle. Dowsing Dagger for Warstorm Surge. Gorgon Flail for Gorgon's Head. Gorgon's Head you could add to any of these lists and it would be very effective. I think maybe it's even better than Gorgon Flail because it only costs 1. Quietus Spike for Chain Reaction. Lightning Greaves for Mask of Avacyn. Swift Foot Boots for Crystal Slipper. Thematic Compass for Journeyer's Kite. Treasure Map for Valakut Exploration. Basalt Monolith for Dormant Volcano. Warren Powerstone for Hedron Archive. Gilded Lotus for Dreamstone Hedron. Inspiring Statuary for Jaya's Immolating Inferno. Caged Sun for Druidic Satchel. Gauntlet of Power for Palladium Myrrh. Krark Clan Ironworks for Mountain. Nyx Lotus for Mountain. And I think these are some cards that we could look at, right? Some cards that are test worthy. Maybe this could have made the main deck. If you want to play around, go for it. I might do that as well. Experimental Frenzy is really interesting because it allows us to play the top card of our library. So if we have effects that allow us to play additional lands like Gurpa or Ori, and then now when we hit a land card on top of our library, we can play it and then play the next card. And in our deck, we have a lot of rituals. So a lot of our cards will produce mana. So I think Experimental Frenzy is definitely worth a second look in terms of adding to your deck. And if you have it in your collection, you might even want to try it out for yourself. Walking Atlas is also effective here because although you can't play the cards from your hand, you could put the land cards from your hand into play using Walking Atlas. So this gives a Walking Atlas some fuel to put lands into play, while you can also play the top cards with Experimental Frenzy. These are some other cards that I think all these could be great in our deck list as well. I just found them while exploring some budget options in paper. Everflowing Chalice, Kedis, Fury Cannonade, Dormant Volcano, Valakut Exploration, and Druidic Satchel. So thank you for watching. Thank you for reaching to the end of the video. Be sure to check out the deck list in the description below and like and subscribe to support the channel. This is MTG Jank providing you with unique and interesting EDH deck techs and other types of content. Have a great day. Bye-bye.